One of the principles of natural selling is discovering their needs or desires or wants and focusing on that first and putting yours up on the shelf. But if you're focusing on getting the sale, whose needs are you really focusing on, theirs or yours? If you're coming from a place of intention, the intention is not to get the sale necessarily, but the intention is to help the other person. If you're trying to get the sale, subconsciously you'll use words, phrases, and expressions that will indicate very, very quickly to the other person, your potential client, that in fact it's about you, not about them.
Welcome to another exciting show of transformation. Prosper with Wayne, creating wealth, health, and happiness in your life. With your host, life and business coach, author, entrepreneur, and lover of life, Wayne Sutton. Prepare to become excited, expand your beliefs, and truly prosper in all the areas of your life. Enjoy.
When it comes to sales, persuasion, I've made a lifelong journey of this. And one of the people that I have studied and followed kind of behind the scenes, we have on today as a guest. And so, Michael Oliver, I am just absolutely honored to have you on. I've learned a lot from you, and I know a lot of people have, and a lot of people haven't realized the importance you have had in the realm of sales. And so I'm glad to have you on board today. Thanks for jumping on Prosper with Wayne.
You're welcome. Pleasure to be here. Let's see if we can work out some stuff that will help all of us somehow or other.
That's it. Yeah. Well, again, as we were talking before we got on the interview, my listeners, I know they're people that are involved in sales and marketing, and then we have people that are not. And I think this is real important because we have people that listen because I talk about health and wellness and happiness, but everybody persuades. And everybody says you're always selling, you're always persuading. I have 4 daughters. They're always selling me on something. But in life in general, we're always persuading. What really caught me, Michael, and I think the reason I wanted to have you on the show today was a number of years ago, I heard your name just get mentioned in an interview. And I was like, okay. And I wrote the name down and I started Googling and I found you. And I bought your book and I started going through it. And I was like, wow, this is really, I love the way you call it, natural selling. This is the way it felt natural to me. It felt good to me. And I know there's a lot of resources behind that, and we'll get into that. But I wanted to just, again, share with people to say, hey, what can I learn from a sales trainer that I can use in everyday life? And for those who are in sales, is there something else I can learn? And there's always more we can learn. But I want to ask you, Michael, you've taught natural selling for maybe 3 decades now. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
Pretty
what
close.
is
I started natural selling in 1997, but I was formulating it before that while I was selling. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, in those basically 30 years, what's the single biggest misunderstanding, I guess, about persuasion that traditional sales training, I guess you would say, gets wrong?
Um, that's an interesting question. First of all, I've been using the word influence rather than persuasion, self-influence. But it's really about helping people, in a sense, persuade themselves, but in a very non-manipulative way. Um, I would say most sales trainers, in fact, most sales training today is directly or indirectly of something that I created and started training in 1997, formally training, which is based on 5 principles. And those principles are very holistic principles. I mean, they work. Doesn't matter whether it's to do with sales or whether it's to do with just normal life. They work, and there's an energy behind them.
Mm.
And what I've found is that virtually all salespeople that I know of, with a couple of exceptions, um, uh, really are still focused on getting the sale, using persuasion to get the sale. That's their mental mindset.
Yeah.
Where I've come from is that let it go. In other words, stop thinking about the sale. And that in itself produces a different energy. So, for example, you can ask exactly the same question. Let's say it's a question to help the other person come to some sort of realization of some sort. Is that if your mindset is focused on getting the sale, and you might not know it, but subconsciously you'll ask that question in a way that sounds manipulative. If it's not,
Mm,
sound conversational, and it'll sound empathetical, it'll sound caring. And that's a major difference. Most sales trainers don't grasp that. They really don't grasp that. Um, and I say most because there's a couple I know of. We mentioned them before, who in fact understand that issue, particularly one of them, and comes from a different place. Trains very differently than me, but comes from a different place. But the mindset is exactly the same. A mindset is very much an an overused, misunderstood word because mindset can mean anything.
got it.
So what you're looking for is, in my terminology, I'm looking for the natural selling mindset. That's what I call it. So it's the differentiated mindset. It's not about being positive. It's not about being anything. It's about being in a frame of mind where you are truly interested in finding out whether your solution is really going to be a fit for that other person and helping them discover that as well. And in fact, talking with them in a way that they discover it for themselves naturally, or they don't.
Hmm.
It's
Okay.
just just as easy that what you've got isn't quite the right fit for them. There might be a better fit, and
Imagine
so
that. Yeah.
yeah, and and
Yeah.
so and so you have a choice then. You might find it's fairly good fit, and you want to pressure for the sale. Okay, so now you're focused on your own needs and not their needs. Part of selling is about discovering another person's needs. In fact, one of the principles of natural selling is discovering their needs and or desires or wants, and
Hmm.
focusing on that first and putting yours up on the shelf. But if you're focusing on getting the sale, whose needs are you really focusing on, theirs or yours? They know
True.
that.
True.
Your
Yeah.
potential clients, they know that. They know what the game is.
Yeah. Yeah. I've often said for those who I've trained, you can read energy, and I think it's not woo woo. It's just like
Yeah,
the mirror neurons that they pick up on an unconscious level. And even as you said, Michael, I think if you're, instead of trying to sound curious and change your tonality to be
yeah,
curious, just be curious. If you're
yeah.
really curious, you don't have to fake the tonality. Um,
No, but my favorite one is like, if you have to manufacture it, then you're not being authentic. I mean, if I'm talking to
mm,
you, I have to lean in and say, "So, Wayne, how do you feel about that?" You know, that is manufactured tonality. But if you're coming from a
yeah.
place of intention, the intention is not to get the sale necessarily, but the intention is to help the other person. That intention flows through. Your tonality will change according to your intention, and it'll happen subconsciously. You don't know it.
Mm,
Conversely, if you're trying to get the sale, subconsciously you'll use words, phrases, and expressions that will indicate very, very quickly to the other person, your potential client, that in fact it's about you, not about them.
hmm. And you talk about in natural selling you speak to the part of the brain, and I love this. I love studying how the mind works. I really do, not just for sales and persuasion and influence, but just for achieving our goals in life and finding happiness. But you
Right.
talk about part of the brain that dissolves tension before it even arises. Um, Helping a client or helping a prospect feel safe versus when they feel sold. And is that, I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm not a brain scientist, but I mean, I worked all this out many years ago, 3 decades ago, a little bit more than that, um, just by experimenting by what seemed makes sense to me, which was then later backed up by science. I mean, I always like to joke the science sort of in selling, especially, eventually caught up with me. That's where they
Yeah.
came from. But it's really about your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex. And your amygdala, which is your sort of going back, you know, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of years, is your kind of fight, flight, or freeze survival mechanism. And that's still with us. It's there, and so consequently, we instinctively take up one of those three stances when we meet someone. And in sales, it's either going to be fight, flight, or in other words, fight. I'm going to fight back. Flight. I'm going to run away from you, which could mean that I'm not going to buy from you. Come up with all sorts of reasons why I'm not going to buy from you. And then there's freeze. Don't say anything. Sometimes a person just doesn't say anything. There's all sorts of phrases, right? That's the amygdala. The other part is the prefrontal cortex, which is the social side of the brain. It's sort of, in a sense, it's all part of the subconscious, but it's the social part of the brain which will determine whether a person trusts you or likes you. And so when you start a conversation with someone, you have to start it. Doesn't matter whether you're making a cold call, whether you're calling a warm lead, whether it's a referral. You have to start it in such a way that says, "I'm not going to threaten you." See, there are two things that a potential client or customer is afraid of when you start a conversation, even if they've asked you to start a conversation. The first one is, how long is this going to take? And the second one is, are you going to make me do something I don't want to do? And that second one is really, really important. They're both important. So you have to clear the decks very, very quickly in a conversation to indicate that you are not going to be threatening and it's actually not going to take any time. However, the irony is that when you're not focused on you and your thoughts aren't on you and you're focused on them and your thoughts are about them, the conversation can go for as long as it takes because they're talking about who's the most fascinating person in the world, who's the most fascinating person in your world,
their self. Sure, absolutely. Yeah. That reminds me, Michael, when I sold insurance years ago, I went with a good friend of mine, and he was magical at this. Magical. Now, he couldn't close the sale, but he could. I had to come in and close, but he could get them so deep. And I remember asking him one day, this was 25 years ago, I said, how do you get that person to open up? And they would tell them private information. How do you get them to open up? He said, I just ask them. I said, yeah, but how do you? He said, I'm just curious. And I've never forgot that. He was so curious about people that it worked that way. And I think that's really important. I think what you said there is really good. How long is this going to take? We can overcome that by just being interested in them. But then, do you let people know up front? You said, how do you disarm them, I guess, for lack of better words, in the beginning of a conversation, presentation, or do you use certain language, or is it your demeanor?
Yeah, but I don't disarm them. You see, that's another word which is an adversarial word. It's a warlike word. So and I'm really interested in words. Words matter. The words you use, really matter. Like, for example, you use the word prospect. See, I don't use the word prospect. If I called you a prospect, how would you feel about that?
Yeah, transactional.
You see,
at best.
And I've here's the difference between sales trainers again. They call them prospects. They're talking one hand about being in an empathetic situation with a potential partner, potential customer, and so on. All right, which is fine because it's a potential partner. But when you start talking about them as prospects, now you're in conflict by using a word that doesn't match with where you're supposed to be coming from. And there's an example. And many times, sales trainers have said to me, well, but I never use it in front of the customer or with the customer. But my question is, how do you know that they don't know? Because if you're using that word, in your copy, in your language, with your friends, with other trainers, and so on and so forth, how do you know that that energy, that real thought comes through? Because everything starts with a thought. Everything in life starts with a thought.
That's so good. That's so true. Wow. And so when you are helping, I mean, you've helped a lot of people. I mean, like you said, 30 years, you've helped a lot of people master this philosophy, I guess. Is there a common inner shift that someone needs to, because most people have, they do call them prospects. They do try to disarm them. They do have their
Yeah,
workflows, scripts, strategies, language patterns.
yeah.
Is there a common inner shift that you think needs to be made first before the other outer techniques, shift?
Well, I think first of all, it's really a matter of deciding sort of whether, in fact, you're finding selling a struggle.
Mm,
It's a matter of how you're thinking before you go into the sale. Whether you have to pump yourself up, whether you are focused on getting the sale, whether it's important to get the sale. One of the keys is just detach from all of that, which initially can be somewhat difficult because especially if you're working for a company and you're under pressure and you've got quotas and stuff like this. But the irony
right.
is that when you let it go and you stop listening to those quotas, you stop listening to other people, and you start decide to take your own route in your own mind and doing what you feel is best for them and for you. When I talk about them, your potential customers, um, then the magic starts happening. But you have to build it on a philosophy, which is how I worked out over the years these five natural selling principles. And they're in my ebook. I can get my ebook by going to naturalselling.com, and it lays it out there. In fact, the ebook is the precursor to the how to, because it's mindset first, skill set second. And most sales training teaches about skill set with mindset in the background. For me, it's mindset first and foremost. And the five principles are about mindset. And they're universal, they're holistic. Like I said, you can apply them to anything. But the ebook actually outlines the three main reasons why you get rejected or objections, and then what you can do about it based on five natural selling principles. And
Mm,
one of them is about detachment. Deepak Chopra talks about this in the Seven Spiritual Laws of Success, about the law of detachment. I was teaching it before I knew about Deepak Chopra, but before I read his book, Seven Spiritual Laws of Success. And I was teaching about detachment starting back in 1997. And it was resonating with people. They would come up to me and they start talking to me about sort of how the training I was giving them was more holistic than anything that they had before. And it intrigued me. I knew it was, but I wasn't really deeply into it at that time. But I knew I was onto something there because that's intrinsically where I wanted to be. Subconsciously, I wanted where I wanted to be. And it was when I read Deepak's book on a beach in La Jolla. I was living in La Jolla at the time, and I started reading the seven principles of success, and I suddenly realized why this was resonating. That
mm,
as a why people are coming to him, why this whole thing was resonating. And so, sort of answering your question in a sort of a bit of a metaphysical way, but that's part of it. The other part is that you've got a philosophy and principles in base, and you adhere to those principles, you've got something to work on because the philosophers have it. It's the comedians, the philosophers, the writers, and so on. They're the ones who really understand how life works. Part of our political systems right now, we're getting rid of all the arts and so on and so forth, moving into science. Science is not where it is. Science can explain to a certain extent, but really it's the arts and it's how the creativity, the thinking of tapping into that sort of universe, if you like, which is really important. But then, so the next step is then, well, how do you go about doing that? Which is where I have an online course, which is how to sell. The first one is why to sell the way people buy. The online course about how to sell the way people, and in there reinforces the philosophical concepts, like, and then how to apply them. Now, having got to that stage, my hope always is that online course, that's it. You don't have to anymore. You just build up on your own experience. It's very experiential. But a lot of times people still get stuck there. They can't move forward. what I do is attempt to help them. I use the word attempt because they can only help themselves, right? Same as you can only help
Sure,
yourself.
sure.
Attempt to help them sort of break through that glass barrier, just break through it, which is holding them back, which is how do you subconsciously accept this whole idea of detachment? How do you talk with someone in a way that allows them to open up and reveal everything to you? A couple of clues here. You mentioned your friend that you or person you worked with selling insurance, that he couldn't quote close, not a word I like, but close a sale. The
Yeah.
big difference is natural selling is that you don't close the sale. You don't present and close. The sale has already been consummated in the discovering stage. There are 7 different types of questions. That's where it's sold. Or if we want to turn the energy around, that's where it's bought.
Hmm.
Because the person
Yeah.
then, when they listen to your questions, they'll sorry, when they answer your questions, they are listening to themselves. They are feeling what it's like to be in their present situation. And depending on the depth of that feeling, they will automatically influence themselves in the present moment to start doing something about it.
Yeah. Michael, that's so good. I have to ask your thoughts on this because there's two really different there's really two different trains of thought here. Number one is revealing, and I'm talking more here in the high ticket sales space where you're on a call, you got 60 minutes to, as you said, don't close the sale or do close the sale. But I'm hearing people that are really more into the pain, like find a pain point, dig deep, dig deep, dig deep. And then there's the other side, which is more along well, I'll mention, like Kenrick Cleveland says, no, you don't want to pull up pain because that can the cause them to freeze. You want to more sell on the dream state. I'm curious in your discovery, are you looking for areas of discomfort and pain? Are you trying to create a gap, or are you more focused on selling the future benefits, or something totally different?
It's both.
Okay.
It's both. I don't like to call it pain. I call it discomfort. You know, the degree that a person, okay, you get this one. The degree that a person will change, in other words, the amount that a person will change from where they are to where they want to go, right, is dependent upon 2 things. The first one is the degree of discomfort they have in their present situation. A person is never going to move unless they're uncomfortable. And a lot of people get very comfortable with being uncomfortable. It is what it is. They've been stuck there for years and they've come to accept it and they come comfortable with it. And change for them can be very difficult. And that's where the value of what we offer is that the ability to help them rethink about where they are so we can do that in the present moment so they can move forward into the future. If you talk about the future too much to a lot of people, right, that is like a fantasy. They've been there, done that, never worked. Why? Because they've been influenced by what has happened in the past. They're sort of, if you like, current reality. Their current reality in the present is based on the past, and the past influences them in the present moment. So you're talking about, in a sense, you're finding out with sales what's missing. What you called me, or you're on answering that, or I'm making a cold call, whatever. It's incumbent upon me to help them find out what's missing, if anything. Think about words, if anything, and then find out how much of that what's missing is affecting their present day, if you like, whether it's professional, personal, or whatever. What is missing there? And as we grow experience with our own products and services, we'll formulate our questions around digging in deeper to discover if, in fact, there is more to it, or if they haven't realized the consequences. One of the 7 different types of questions are called consequence questions.
Sure.
Discover the consequences consequences of not doing something, or doing something going in a direction which you know is not going to work for them. The consequences themselves. So what you're doing is that you're helping them dig deeper into literally the ramifications of taking action, not taking action, going with someone else, or whatever. You're not doing it a salesy way. You're doing it in a way based on your own experience, and your own experience sort of gathers. Then you introduce the what if, or what if you could change this. And sometimes you meet resistance. Personally, where they argue, meet resistance. So you're persistent. You say, I understand what you're saying. However, what if you could? What if someone else has already done this? What if you could do the same thing? Would that make a difference? And you're persistent. But if you're coming from a place of empathy, you can be persistent because they know that you're there. If you're coming from a place of wanting to get a sale, okay, here's a big difference. They know that as well, and they'll push back hard.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the biggest key. Even reading your book, and it's probably been 5 or 6 years since I read your book, but even reading the book, I realized um, that energy, as you just said, people can read. I remember this from some NLP trainings years ago. It was really about congruency, when your words match in
Mm.
here and when they don't. And I think I tell the story. I recently bought a new car for my wife, and oh my goodness, that guy needed some sales training. I was
Yeah,
determined to buy the car, but I think he'd watched one too many. I won't mention their names, but some of the other sales trainers that are out there. Every quote he used, and there was no empathy. There was no empathy. He never once really found out what's important to me
yeah,
or my
yeah,
wife about buying a rather expensive vehicle, in my opinion. I'm like, what's important to me was never even. It was just a matter of like, sales tactics and strategies. And I even asked him. I said, "Have you studied under?" And I mentioned these people's names, and he's like, "Yes." How'd you know? And I'm like, "You sound like they're YouTube shorts."
yeah,
But I know also detachment. I want to go back to that word really quick because I think a lot of people miss this. Because I know there's other trainers that say that, hey, detach from the outcome. But I think they just say that, but they're not teaching it because it's so, and I'm like, even when they say it, I'm like, well, how do you detach? And do you mean it? Because everything else you're saying is like, close this sale or else.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so what does
Detach from the
detachment
out.
really mean?
Yeah, detach from the
Yeah.
outcome, but make sure you close the sale. It's a contradiction
That's,
in terms.
yeah,
Like,
that's exactly right. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know.
So,
Uh, well, it's about letting go. You know, let's take an analogy of a toilet seat. You know, you go to the bathroom, you leave the toilet seat up, right? And your wife says to you, "You've done it again. You left the toilet seat up." And you go, "No, I didn't. I put it down." You didn't. You left it up, and so on. And you're having an argument, right? I mean, that can be a sort of fairly typical thing. And and the best thing, so what you're trying to do is you're trying to persuade her that you're right, she's wrong, and she's trying to do it the other way around. The dead easy thing is whether you did or you didn't, just let it go. Just say, "Oh, I'm sorry," and do better, and remember to put it down. Or if it stays up again, just let it go. Say, "I'm sorry," as opposed to arguing your point of view. And I get into I've learned, and it's not part of my personality because I'm I'm pretty forthright, but I've learned to shut up when it comes to a point when it's going to be an argument, and I'll just back off. And I'll just go silent, not sulking, but just go silent, um,
mm,
and just be quiet. And it's about that. It's about detachment. It's about detachment allows you in sales or in anything else in personal life to listen to where a person is coming from. In other words,
yeah.
you can ask a question, and in that answer, you can get anywhere between 1 and 5 different conversational subjects if you listen. If you're searching for something that the other person is wanting to is telling you, and you're using that, the chances are it won't be the right direction you go in, because there's a lot of valuable information that a person can give you. A potential customer give you a huge amount of valuable information. You're searching for that piece or pieces that allows you to talk about the conversation, and when you talk about where they're coming from, and when you do that, they know that you are hearing them. They know that you're listening to them.
Hmm.
And one thing that
Yeah.
is missing in this world is that people don't listen.
Yeah. I just did a video, and I actually, active listening is what is always taught, even though very few people do it. But I think the next level is really that intuitive listening, where you're really listening with the intuition. And I think it can be spiritual, but I also really believe it's more of those. Again, I'm not a brain scientist either, but I believe it's the mirror neurons that are picking up and recognizing. Um, and so I'm so glad. I know we could go much deeper. I want people to be able to go and check you out. So it's naturalselling.com, correct? The
Yep,
best way to
that's
pick
it.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You go to the
Um,
course. You go to the courses page. There's the ebook there, which is the basis, the philosophy. I won't train or coach anyone who has not read the ebook and taken the course, because we need to be on the same page.
that's
I've
good.
had people come to me and say, "Well, I've gone with somebody else, whatever. It's this training is similar to yours," and so there's no training similar to mine, because it might on the outset look similar, but in fact, there's a deeper side to it, which makes this work magically.
Mm,
And that's the missing part, and it's the philosophy behind it and being able to realize the philosophy. So the ebook is really, really important. If you go no further than
yeah,
the
that's
ebook,
good.
then that's fine. um, it's only $7. I mean, it's
Yeah,
and it's probably worth $7,000. I don't know. It's
that's
just an
so good.
introduction to the whole thing.
That's good. That's good. Um, Really quick before we end the episode, I'd love to know how did just to maybe how did you get involved in sales, and how I know you said you basically discovered created this, but how did you get involved in sales, and how did the natural selling birth? Where was the birthplace of it, and maybe from the beginning?
Well, the birthplace is when I started selling in very late 1979. That shows you how far back I go. Um, I had probably done every single job there was underneath the earth, in the earth, on the earth, I should say. I was totally unemployable. I was not a corporate person or anything like that, and I discovered solar energy. It was a three-line ad in the Los Angeles Times. I answered it. Spent 3 months kind of struggling, learning how to sell domestic hot water systems, and then found apartment building systems. And I was told that you'll never sell these because they're so difficult. But I did. I mean, in the year 1980, I should say, I made about $85,000 US dollars. A lot of money in those days, and I was
Sure.
selling apartment building solar energy domestic hot water systems for anywhere between seven and a half and $95,000, and I was making money. I'd never seen this kind of before. I mean, my first check was $1,800. I mean, that was huge to me, and
Yeah.
I and I really liked the money, but I hated the process. I hated what I was reading about the closers. In fact, there's a book behind me right now called The Closers, which has actually got some great information in there. If you put it,
I'm sure it's Ben's book. I'm pretty sure I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
um,
But
uh, Tom Hopkins, all that sort of stuff. And I always felt at that time there had to be, because it was so adversarial, so adversarial.
guys, I'm going to tell you again, if you follow me here, you followed me, even those who followed me in my sales training, go to naturalselling.com, pick up the book, and check out Michael. Michael, again, it's an honor to have you on. I truly respect what you do, and would love to have you back and maybe take one of those other principles and dig a little deeper at some point. So, guys, again, thanks for being on. And for everyone else, if this is your first time here with us, hit that subscribe button, hit that share button, whether you're on Spotify or Apple or YouTube, wherever you're seeing us at. We're going to teach you how to create health, wealth, and happiness in your life. And it all goes back to being intentional. So start with that. So thanks again, guys, and make it a great day.
Thanks for joining us again at Prosper with Wayne. Be sure to subscribe to us for more exciting, life-changing episodes. Go today, in fact. Go now to prosperwithwayne.com and enter your email for our exclusive newsletter and other resources. God bless and go prosper.